We're still reading Awesome Nightfall with Saigyo. When we come to Patkari, and here it says Saigyo pursues, one of his themes is paradoxes and problems associated with throwing away the world. Here he says, I like this poem. This is 21. He says, Me, O Sutsuri, 2169 on the 372 in the Shikawakashi. So then, it's the one who has thrown himself away who is thought the loser. But he who cannot lose self is the one who is really lost. So then it's the one who has thrown himself away who is thought the loser, but he who cannot lose self is the one who is really lost. Reading from Saigyo. Composing this poem, Kobayashi Hideo, perhaps Japan's premier literary critic in the 20th century, wrote, a poem such as this is a conceptual one, looking like it borrowed the dialectic grammatical structures of Buddhist text. Saigyo making the paradox in a poem such as this into a reliable source for poetry was opening totally new territory, a place no one had entered before. That's from the top critic. The conceptual dimension recognized by Kobayashi does not, however, mean that the content was alien to Saigyo's emotional experience. Alright, now we're going to go on. We're not reading every little critic's note. During the period of mourning his father, Toki Daiji Jin's Yoshi's mother died as well. Having heard this, I sent the following in condolence to him from Mount Koya. I'm reading from Saigyo's words. He says, Kasani Kiru 856. One on another wisteria robes of mourning ever deeper suggest you might now die your life in the Dharma's depth. He says, I received the following response from Kotu Taiken's Yoshi. Fuji Koromu 857. The color of my garments may have deepened, but my mind is still shallow, pale, unfit for such a step. If Saigyo interpreted a lull in the courtier's poetic activities as a personal misfortune, there were other things consequent to the Hogan's disturbance that he surely would have viewed as the onset of some kind of cultural and societal nightfall. Here, Saigyo, perhaps more than any other, registered that perception in the poetry and prose he wrote between 1156 and his death in 1190. It is the verse of a man who, in spite of being a monk, remains keenly aware of what is happening within this ordinary society, and for the most part sees that society embarking on a downward slide. This too is probably linked to his conviction that things are not what they seem, and that ironies abound, being somewhat detached, both physically and socially, from the very center of things was not a bad way to see them more clearly. It appears to be why he wrote a poem such as the following. He says, Haruka Naru, 2079. Boulder encircled space, so far from everything that here I'm all alone. A place where none can view me, but I can review all things. The impulse to put distance between himself and the capital resulted in another journey, this time westward and on to the island of Shikoku. At the age of 51, he departed with the sense that he might never return, and it had been exactly 28 years since this tonsure before leaving the capital. He wrote, "Just as had always been so, I continued to go to the Kamo shrine even after becoming a monk. Now at an advancing age, I was about to pilgrimage to Shikoku, thinking that I may never return. So I made a night visit to the shrine on the 10th day of the 10th month of 1168. I wanted to present a votive request, but since I was wearing the clothes of a Buddhist monk and could not go inside the shrine, I requested someone to present it on my behalf. Through the trees, the light of the moon was filtering softly, so that the atmosphere of the place was even more sacred than usual, and I was deeply moved. I wrote, Kashi Komaru, 1181. Awe is what fills me as my tears fall onto the sacred branch I here present. My feelings are of someone wondering if he'll ever return. This journey was a result of very important poetry. Part of its purpose was to pay homage to two persons. Here he says, coming to Sanuki, I was at a place called the Cove of Matsuyama. I looked around for the exact location where the retired emperor had resided, but no trace of his earlier presence could be found. He says, Matsuyama Kono, 1444. The ship he was on crossed the waves to Matsuyama and then suddenly disappeared as he too slipped down below our horizon. The best known of his verses written during this journey were recycled later into the Hogan Monogatari, a war tale likely composed during the next century, and in the Matsuyama Tenji, a no drama it was. He says, I was performing a service at Sutoki's gravesite at Siramini, and he said, Yoshiya Kimi, 1146, 446. Let it be, my lord, surely this is nothing like the jewel-floored palaces of your past. But can anything alter what's occurred? Concerning heavenly beings, he says, the above the clouds life is surely joy itself, but tempered by knowing life even there cannot go on forever. Here he says, I was in the province of Sanuki and in the mountains where Kobo Dashi once lived. While there I stayed in a hut and I had woven together out of grasses. The moon was especially bright and looking in the direction of the inward sea. My vision was unclouded. And he writes, cloud-free mountains encircle the sea which holds the reflected moon. This transforms islands into emptiness holes in a sea of ice. The fact that Saigyo was positioned high enough to look down on an array of smaller islands themselves in a sea formed within two much larger islands is the positional starting point from this extraordinary poem.
Read the poem again.
Kimori Naki 1447. Cloud-free mountains encircle the sea, which holds the reflected moon. This transforms islands into emptiness holes in a sea of ice. We've heard this poem in a different translation. We have total recall.
Read it again.
You remember the other translations? I don't seem to have total recall. I used to. What happened to the clouds? The poem says, cloud-free mountains encircle the sea, which holds the reflected moon. This transforms islands into emptiness holes in a sea of ice. The islands are emptiness holes.
First he says,
it's certainly different.
He sees that from close, the mountains without the clouds, and then you surround probably like a portion of the sea that goes around. But then he sees the whole picture, and the mountains become holes in the biggest sea of ice. It looks like ice. I don't know if it is, but it looks like ice. The moonlight.
Here it says, the link with Ku-Kei across the span of 3 centuries becomes even more intense. Saigyo writes, the climb up to Mandala Temple in order to carry out the activities proper for a pilgrimage there was an unusually difficult one. The climber must make what seems like an almost perpendicular ascent. On the peak was buried sacred sutras that Kobo Tashi copied out with his own hand. Outside the priest's quarters at the top is a 10-foot square dais. It is said that Kobo Tashi climbed up on this every day in order to perform austerities, in order for others to perform devotional activities on it without risk of falling off. A double enclosure had been constructed. Nevertheless, the dangers one faces in making a climb up to this place are truly extraordinary. I, for one, made my way to the top by crawling along on all fours. He's smart. He goes on all fours. It sounds like a difficult climb.
How did you get down? It must be more difficult to get down.
Like rock climbing, dear. He was in New Paltz. He had a rope. I don't know. He's a mountain climber. He says, amazing to have made it here to this point, where holy ones convened. Pledges are best when made on precipices above it all. There he goes again. He says, Maguriya 1461. Amazing to have made it here to this point, where holy ones convened. Pledges are best when made on precipice above it all. He likes elevation.
Read the last 2 lines.
Holy ones convene. Pledges are best when made on precipice above it all.
You see, when you're in a dungeon,
I think there's some value to physical, like altitude. He says, Saigyo writes of this place as the high point, in a most literal way, of his journey to Shikoku, but also as the apex of what made it important to him spiritually. We're reading from part 3.
Tired when you are in a danger, in a way. That's what the precipice is.
The author is the translator, William Lafleur. He's from University of Pennsylvania. He has a Japanese wife and daughter, I think.